The stores are deserted. Your phone has no signal. The light went out 3 days ago and is not coming back on. Right now, while you watch this, there are people who believe they are prepared for disaster, but they may perish within 2 weeks after a serious collapse. Not because they lacked supplies, but due to 3 critical mistakes made in the first 90 days that turned their careful preparations into a death sentence. I will tell you what these mistakes are, and most importantly, what specific actions you need to take in the first 24 hours, the first week, and the first 3 months that will determine whether you will be a survivor or a statistic. What most people do not understand about crisis scenarios is that the most dangerous period is not the disaster itself, but the 30 to 60 days after it, when despair peaks and social order completely collapses. The statistics are alarming. In major social collapses throughout history, 40% of deaths occur not from the initial event, but from the consequences that follow. Let me tell you about the hierarchy of survival needs that determines who survives and who does not. Most people are completely confused by this. The first, second, and third days are an informational vacuum, the critical 72 hours. At the moment communication ceases, you enter what I call an information vacuum. This is the moment when your first critical decision determines everything that follows. Do you go outside for information or immediately shut yourself off? Here is a paradoxical truth. People who rush to find out what is happening have a 70% higher loss rate than those who immediately start following the shutdown protocol. Why? Because they expose themselves to danger at the most risky time, when panic has not yet gripped everyone, but the habit of normalcy still leads to deadly decisions. Your first 72 hours should follow what I call the gray man protocol. But it's not just about staying unnoticed. It's a systematic assessment and preparation for the chaos that will ensue. The first hour before 6 is the immediate assessment protocol. As soon as you realize that this is not a temporary power outage, you need to perform what I call a 6-hour assessment protocol. This is your time to gather critical information before the situation worsens. First, conduct a communication check. Check all available methods: landline, mobile phone, internet, radio, even a radio station if you have one. Document what works and what doesn't. This information will give you an idea of the scale of the disaster. If only the cell towers are not functioning, it may be a local problem. If nothing works, including landlines and the internet, you are dealing either with a major cyber attack or an event like an electromagnetic pulse. The latter requires an assessment of utilities: water pressure, gas supply, electrical systems. Open each tap and document the pressure and color of the water. Check the gas appliances. Test the electrical outlets with a simple device. This basic approach will help you understand the damage to the infrastructure and plan for resource conservation. Thirdly, conduct reconnaissance of the perimeter, but not as people usually do. Do not walk around the neighborhood and ask questions. Instead, use visual observation from windows, observation posts, and other concealed spots. What are your neighbors doing? They are in a panic, preparing, or ignoring. Are there unusual cars or people in the area? Inventory resources and implement safety measures within 6 to 24 hours. During this time, you transition from assessment to action. You need to conduct what is called a critical inventory of resources. This is not just counting what you have, but also calculating resource consumption and identifying vulnerabilities. Start with water.
Вам нужно по 1 галлону на человека в день для питья, плюс дополнительно для приготовления пищи и базовой гигиены. Точно рассчитайте, сколько дней продлится ваш текущий запас воды. Определите дополнительные источники.
Water heaters, toilet tanks, but not the toilets themselves. Ice cubes, canned goods. Set up collection systems for any precipitation. Inventorying food requires understanding caloric content and cooking requirements. These cans of beans are useless if you have no way to heat them, and they require precious water for cooking. Prioritize foods that do not require cooking and are high in calories. Immediately create a schedule for distributing portions. Do not wait until supplies run out. Implementing safety measures at this stage is critical. It's not about turning your home into a fortress. It's about early warning and deterrent systems. Simple devices with motion sensors, alarms on doors and windows, even empty cans with stones inside can provide early warning. The goal is to avoid confrontations, not to win shootouts. The observation phase will begin on the second and third days. By this time, certain patterns will begin to emerge in your neighborhood. You will see the first signs that something is coming. Some neighbors will be in complete denial, acting as if everything is fine. Others will fall into total panic. A small number will quietly prepare, just like you. Document these patterns. The group in denial will be the first to fall into despair. The panicked group will quickly deplete their resources and become dangerous around the 7th to 10th day. The quietly prepared may become potential allies, but also competitors for resources. At this time, you also need to establish communication protocols with trusted neighbors rather than complex networks. Simple systems, such as signals from a window or specific times and places for meetings. You want to share critical information without revealing your capabilities. Your first 72 hours should also include establishing routines that you can maintain in the long term. Sleep schedules, shifts, mealtimes, windows for communication. These routines will help maintain your mental health and operational efficiency in the long term. This brings me to something important that I discovered while exploring historical survival patterns. I came across a resource called The Lost Border Handbook that radically changed my understanding of long-term survival strategies. I was drawn not only to the survival techniques but also to the emphasis on historical methods that do not require modern infrastructure. The guide describes things like making powerful medicines from scratch, preserving large volumes of food without refrigeration, and creating autonomous water systems that actually work. These are not theoretical concepts, but time-tested methods that supported entire communities in much more challenging conditions than we are likely to face. Particularly valuable is how these historical techniques address the main issue of 90 days of survival, the transition from consuming reserves to producing renewable resources. I will discuss this resource in more detail later, but I wanted to mention it now, as understanding this transition is absolutely critical for your long-term survival. The 4th to the 14th day. A wave of despair. When society collapses, it is at that moment that unprepared people realize that help will not come. I studied 23 different cases of societal collapse, and the pattern is always the same. From the 4th to the 7th day, organized looting is observed. From the 8th to the 12th, house searches begin. From the 10th to the 14th, the first acts of violence against prepared families occur. The psychological shift is dramatic and predictable. On the 3rd day, your neighbor politely knocks, asking for help. By the 7th day, he is demanding it. On the 10th day, the same neighbor starts to calculate whether it's worth risking for your family's resources. From the 4th to the 7th day is the scavenging phase. During this time, people still adhere to some social norms while desperately searching for resources. You will see groups forming to search for abandoned buildings, closed shops, and empty houses. These groups initially act together but quickly become competitors as easy resources dwindle. Your strategy in this phase is what I call useful invisibility. You want to create the impression that you have fewer resources than you actually do, while positioning yourself to potentially benefit from the information gathered by these scavenging groups. One effective tactic is the exhaustion deception strategy. Leave small signs that you have already sought help or that you are as troubled as everyone else. An empty refrigerator with an open door. A few empty cans. Unnoticed trash. Signs of basic scavenging in your own home. But during this time, you need to gather information. Who organizes the groups? Who has skills? Who has resources they don't talk about? Who falls into despair the fastest? This information will be critically important in the next phase, from the 8th to the 12th day, the phase of systematic search. At this time, scavenging becomes systematic and obsessive. Groups start searching houses. At first, they ask for permission, but soon they begin to demand access. They are looking for resources, but also assessing what people have for the future. Your defense at this stage is based on what I call the protocol of controlled disclosure. You need to appear cooperative while safeguarding your real resources. Prepare a small stock of supplies that you can discover and share if you find yourself under pressure. This serves several purposes. It makes you appear open. It shows that you are not hoarding supplies and can earn you goodwill. But the key to this stage lies in understanding the psychology of those who seek. They are not evil people. They are frightened and desperate parents trying to feed their families. The attitude towards them with respect and humanity while protecting your resources is a delicate balance that can be decisive in how you are perceived, as a resource or as a threat. Create several shelters for your supplies. Not just one secret room, but distributed hiding places throughout your property. Use techniques like false bottoms in furniture, buried containers, and camouflage. Resource seekers look for obvious places, so be less noticeable. The 10th to 14th days are a threshold of violence. This is a time when despair overcomes social norms for some people. You will begin to notice real acts of violence as people cross moral boundaries they never thought they would cross. Violence often begins with verbal confrontations over resources between groups of marauders, but quickly escalates to attacks on individual families. Understanding the threshold of violence is critically important, as it is not random. Violence almost always follows predictable patterns. It starts with verbal clashes, escalates to threats, and then to physical attacks. Recognizing these escalation patterns gives you the opportunity to de-escalate or leave dangerous situations. Your safety at this stage must change. The useful invisibility of the first days should be complemented by reliable means of deterrence. This does not mean looking like a fortress, but it does mean having visible, yet non-provocative security measures. Motion sensors, surveillance cameras, even fake ones, alarm stickers in the yard, even if you don't have a dog. This creates uncertainty for potential threats. The main thing is to make your property a harder target than your neighbors, but not to look wealthy enough to justify the increased risk. The 15th to the 30th days is a period of power positioning, community formation, and resource wars. At this stage, your location becomes critically important. In urban areas, by the 30th day, there is a 90% reduction in population due to deaths or evacuation. In the suburbs, stabilization occurs around a 60% reduction. In rural areas, there is sometimes even an increase in population due to refugees. But here's what's interesting. The survivors are not always those with the most supplies. It is the people who understood the paradox of resource visibility. Having resources helps survival, but their visibility can lead to death. The Great Migration, days from the 15th to the 25th. Around the 15th day, what I call the Great Migration will begin. People who initially stayed in place hoping for salvation or a return to normal life finally decide to leave their territories. This leads to mass population movements that radically change the dynamics of survival. Waves of migration pose serious dangers for several reasons. Firstly, they cause desperate people, stripped of resources, to pass through your territory. Secondly, they can overload local resources and communities. Thirdly, among migrants, there are often people who have already crossed moral boundaries and view violence as an acceptable solution. However, waves of migration also create opportunities. They can rid your territory of problematic people, bring news and information from other regions, and sometimes include qualified and valuable individuals who could strengthen your community. Your strategy during migration waves is called selective interaction. You need to gather information and possibly attract valuable people while avoiding the dangers posed by desperate masses. This requires careful observation, controlled contact, and quick decision-making. Set up observation posts to monitor migration routes. Create protocols for approaching migrants or their inquiries to you. Develop criteria to determine who can become a valuable addition to your group and who poses an unacceptable risk. 20 to 30 days. Wars for resource consolidation. When easily accessible opportunities for scavenging run out, the remaining groups begin to compete more actively for controlled resources. At this time, so-called resource consolidation networks form. Groups controlling valuable assets like functioning wells, solar power plants, or fuel reserves. These networks often start as mutual protection agreements, but quickly evolve into tribute systems where weaker groups pay the strong for access to resources. Understanding these dynamics is crucial, as you need to take a favorable position before the network solidifies. The most successful survivors during this period become central nodes in resource networks, controlling valuable assets, or position themselves as valuable service providers for these networks. A simple desire to hide and avoid these dynamics usually leads to failure, as isolation becomes unbearable. Assess the resources you control that may be needed by others. Water sources, energy generation, medical supplies, technical skills, or strategically important locations. Develop plans to utilize these resources for establishing mutually beneficial relationships, rather than just defending them from everyone. Days 31 to 60. Phase of community formation. Alliance or death. By the 30th day, the landscape changes drastically. The remaining people are either predators or potential allies. At this time, two types of communities are formed: constructive cooperatives and destructive gangs. This is the reality that many preppers ignore. Acting alone after 60 days is essentially suicide. The most successful survivors formed or joined cooperative groups between the 20th and 40th day. If you wait too long, you will either become too weak to contribute, or already formed groups will create their trust networks. The process of choosing a community takes place from the 30th to the 40th day. The right choice of community is literally a matter of life and death. Joining the wrong group can lead to slavery, robbery, or even more serious problems. Choosing the right group greatly increases the chances of survival. The evaluation protocol for groups that I developed, based on the study of successful survivor communities, includes 5 critical points. The first is the analysis of the resource distribution model. How does the group approach the issue of resource sharing? Do they orient themselves towards mutual aid, where everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives according to their needs? Or do they operate on the principle of extraction, where resources flow from the weak to the strong? Pay attention to how they treat the most vulnerable members. Groups that support elderly, injured, or sick members tend to be more stable and ethical. Groups that abandon or exploit vulnerable members will ultimately turn against you when you become inconvenient. Observe their decision-making process regarding resources. Are decisions made collectively, or does a small group control everything? The accumulation of resources by leaders is a serious warning sign indicating that the group will not withstand internal tensions in the long term. The second is the assessment of leadership structure. Effective leadership in post-collapse conditions differs from the ordinary. You need clear power structures capable of making quick decisions, but also accountability mechanisms that prevent abuses. Be cautious of groups without clear leadership. Decisions made by a committee are too slow in a crisis. One should also be wary of groups with absolute leadership. In high-stress situations, power corrupts quickly. The most successful groups have specific leader roles with defined responsibilities and time limits or rotation systems. Look for leaders who demonstrate competence in crisis management, fair resource distribution, and conflict resolution. Charismatic leaders without practical skills often create unstable groups that collapse under pressure. The third is the assessment of security philosophy. This is perhaps the most critical assessment. Groups are usually divided into 3 categories: defense-oriented, aggressive expansionists, or passively evasive. Each of these categories has different consequences for survival. Defense-oriented groups prioritize protecting existing resources and avoiding conflicts. They are generally more stable and ethical, but can be vulnerable to aggressive neighbors and have limited growth potential. Aggressive expansionist groups actively seek to control more resources and territories. They can be very successful in the short term, but generally create enemies and internal conflicts that ultimately destroy them. Over time, they also become more ruthless and less ethical. Passively evasive groups hope to remain unnoticed and avoid any conflicts. These groups rarely survive in the long term, as they cannot effectively respond to external threats and do not develop the necessary capabilities for sustainable existence. Look for groups that primarily have a defensive position but are capable of aggressive actions if necessary. They should have clear rules of interaction and strict ethical boundaries regarding violence. Fourth, a growth strategy and sustainable development planning. How does the group plan to sustain its activities in the long term? Do they simply exhaust existing resources or develop renewable resource systems? Groups focused solely on consumption are actually self-destructive. They can survive the first 90 days, but after 6 months or a year, they will collapse. Look for groups that are already planning and implementing sustainable systems, such as gardens, livestock, water purification, production capabilities, and educational systems. These actions require the investment of current resources for future benefits, indicating long-term thinking and the competence of leadership. The fifth is the exit policy and members' rights. This may seem less important, but it is actually a key indicator of the group's health. How does a group treat members who want to leave? Can you leave freely, receiving your share of resources, or do you find yourself trapped after joining? Groups that do not allow their members to leave peacefully essentially function like cults or organizations similar to slavery. They can provide short-term security, but in the end, they will become prisons. Also, consider how the group resolves internal conflicts and rule violations. Are there fair procedures for resolving disputes, or is justice arbitrary and punishments excessive? From the 40th to the 60th day, integration and value creation. Once you join the right group, your survival depends on how quickly you can establish yourself as a valuable member. This involves not only contributing resources, but also developing relationships and becoming indispensable to the group's success. The most effective integration strategies focus on solving existing group problems rather than simply adding resources. Is the group facing medical issues, safety concerns, food preservation, or technical difficulties? Position yourself as a solution to the group's critical needs. Develop multiple sources of value. Do not limit yourself to the role of a medic or safety officer. Educate yourself in various fields to be useful in different situations. This will also protect you if your main skill becomes less in demand. Build personal relationships with key group members. Your technical skills will keep you alive, but personal connections will help you integrate and protect yourself. Take the time to understand the background, concerns, and goals of other members. Share your story and motivation. Participate in group decision-making processes. Don't just follow orders, contribute ideas, ask thoughtful questions, and help solve the group's problems. Groups value members who help them make better decisions, not just those who blindly follow orders. The crisis of skill transition. Days 45 to 60. Here, most prepared individuals face catastrophic failure. During the period from the 45th to the 60th day, you encounter what I call the skills transition crisis. Your supplies are running low, and you need to shift from consumption to production. If you lack the necessary skills, all these carefully gathered supplies only delay your death by a few weeks. This transition is particularly difficult as it requires a completely different mindset and abilities. Survival in the consumption phase involves resource preservation, sheltering, and protection. Survival in the production phase is about creation, collaboration, and risk calculation. A critical hierarchy of skills for the transitional period. The first level consists of immediate production skills that can start generating resources or value within days or weeks. Water management systems. It is much more than just storing water. You need to understand water sources, purification, storage, and distribution. Can you identify safe natural water sources? Can you build effective filtration systems from available materials? Are you able to create storage systems that prevent pollution and maintain water quality for a long time? The most successful survivors I studied had several water supply systems, a main reservoir, rainwater collection systems, purification capabilities, various methods including solar disinfection, sand filtration, and chemical treatment, as well as distribution systems that minimized contamination risk. Preservation and processing of food. Your food supplies will not last forever, and you need to start processing new food sources immediately. This includes understanding the processes of fermentation, smoking, drying, salting, and other preservation methods that do not require refrigeration. But it is also important to know how to process products that are usually not consumed: liver, unusual cuts of meat, wild plants, and alternative sources of protein. The ability to cook nutritious and tasty dishes from available ingredients becomes extremely valuable both for your family and as a skill for barter. Basic medical and sanitary systems. Medical emergencies do not cease due to the collapse of society. You need practical medical skills that go beyond first aid: suturing, treating infections, setting broken bones, managing chronic diseases without modern medications. Sanitation and hygiene systems are equally important. Poor sanitation kills more people in disaster conditions than violence or hunger. You need to understand waste management, water sanitation, food safety, and personal hygiene in resource-scarce conditions. Safety and early warning systems. This does not mean becoming a tactical operator. It is important to understand threat assessment, early warning systems, defensive positioning, and conflict avoidance. Most aspects of survival security are not about fighting, but about avoiding a fight. Develop observation skills, camouflage, noise control, and threat assessment. Learn to recognize potential problems before they become immediate threats. Understand how to de-escalate conflicts and when tactical retreat is the best solution. The second level, skills for multiplying resources. These skills allow you to create more resources than you consume. Agricultural production. This includes not just planting a garden. You need to understand soil health, companion planting, pest management, seed preservation, and crop rotation. It's important to know which crops provide the most nutrition per unit of land and labor. Consider the principles of permaculture that create self-sustaining agricultural systems. Study forest gardening, aquaponics, and other intensive growing methods that maximize yield in small spaces, skills in production and repair. The ability to fix, modify, and create useful things becomes incredibly valuable when new goods are unavailable. This includes basic metalworking, woodworking, textile production, and electronics repair. Focus on skills that use accessible materials and simple tools. Learn to make soap, candles, tools, clothing, and other necessary items from available materials. Trade and economic systems. Understand how to identify valuable goods for exchange, establish fair exchange rates, and create mutually beneficial trading relationships. Learn what items will be valuable in post-collapse scenarios and how to obtain or create them. Develop negotiation skills and understand basic economic principles. Economies after collapse function very differently, often reverting to barter and direct exchange systems. The transfer of knowledge and education. The ability to teach others valuable skills makes you incredibly important to any community. If you can teach people to purify water, grow food, or treat medical conditions, you will become indispensable. Develop teaching and learning skills. Learn to break complex processes into teachable stages. Create reference materials and training systems that others can use to master critically important skills. The third level is long-term recovery skills. These skills become critically important for communities that have survived the first 90 days and need to build sustainable long-term systems. Construction and engineering. The ability to design and build resilient infrastructure becomes crucial for long-term survival. This includes understanding structural engineering, electrical systems, water supply systems, and waste management. Focus on techniques that use available local materials and do not require complex manufacturing. Study traditional construction methods that have proven to be durable and effective. Advanced medical knowledge. While basic medical skills are immediately necessary, in-depth medical knowledge becomes incredibly valuable for the long-term health of the community. This includes understanding diagnostic technologies, surgical procedures, pharmaceutical preparation, and public health management, guidance, and administration. Communities striving for long-term survival need effective management systems. It is necessary to study conflict resolution methods, resource management, decision-making, and leadership techniques that work under high stress. The development of the educational system. For long-term survival, it is important to pass knowledge to the next generation. Communities need people who can develop and manage educational systems that preserve and transmit critically important knowledge. The periods from the 60th to the 90th day are a test of resilience, production versus consumption. This period separates the temporary survivors from those who will thrive in the future. By the 60th day, your initial supplies should be nearly exhausted if you allocated resources correctly. Everything beyond that depends on renewable resources and sustainable systems. The psychological challenge during this period is immense. You face what researchers call the syndrome of uncertainty about the future, the depressing realization that the old world will not return. The level of depression sharply increases during this time, even among successful survivors. The problem of balancing production and safety. This is one of the most complex tasks from the 60th to the 90th day. It is necessary to balance production activities with safety requirements. To ensure long-term survival, one must engage in planting, building, and creating. But these actions make you noticeable and vulnerable. Traditional safety advice emphasizes secrecy and protection, yet production requires openness and risk. You cannot garden in complete secrecy. You cannot build water supply unnoticed. You cannot develop trade relations without demonstrating your capabilities. Successful survivors tackle this problem by creating cooperative safety networks, coordinated groups of 3 to 5 families that balance production activities and overlapping protection. One family is engaged in gardening while another provides oversight. One tends to livestock, and the other maintains communication. Implementation of cooperative safety networks. Principles of network formation. Choose partners in the network based on complementary skills, geographical proximity, and proven reliability. You need people who bring different abilities to the network but share similar values and long-term goals. Establish clear agreements on resource allocation, security responsibilities, and decision-making authority. These agreements should cover both routine operations and emergencies. Operational security protocols. Develop communication systems that allow coordination of actions without revealing your activities to potential threats. These can be simple, visual signals, scheduled radio messages, or physical message transmission systems. Create coordinated patrol graphics that ensure the protection of production activities without requiring excessive human resources. Develop response protocols for various types of threats. Risk distribution strategies. Do not place all production activities in one location. Distribute gardens, workshops, and warehouses across several sites to reduce the impact of potential security breaches. Develop backup plans for critical production processes. If your main garden is damaged, do you have alternative places to grow? If your workshop is discovered, can you continue important production elsewhere? The curve of resource recovery. There is a critical point that occurs between the 70th and 85th day for most survivors. I call it the resource recovery curve. During this period, your production efforts begin to yield more resources than you consume daily. Families that reached this point by the 8th decade of the day had a 90% long-term survival rate. Families that did not reach this by the 90th day had only a 15% survival rate after a 6-month period. Accelerating resource recovery, high yield, fast-growing food sources. Focus on crops and food sources that provide maximum nutrition in minimal time. Microgreens can be harvested in 7 to 14 days. Rabbits breed quickly and efficiently convert feed into protein. Fish in aquaponic systems can grow rapidly while fertilizing plants. Value-added products. Don't just limit yourself to growing or harvesting raw materials. Process them into more valuable products. Turn milk into cheese. Preserve vegetables. Process herbs into medicines. Value-added products are more nutritious, last longer, and are more valuable for trade. Monetize skills. Turn your skills into resources by offering services to other survivors. Medical treatment, equipment repair, training, and security services can be exchanged for necessary resources. Resource multiplication systems. Develop systems that generate multiple types of resources. A well-designed garden produces food, medicines, materials for production, and compost to improve the soil. Animals provide meat, dairy products, leather, fertilizers, and labor. Advanced production strategies from the 85th to the 90th days. Integrated resource systems create processes where the waste of one process becomes raw material for another. Kitchen food scraps feed livestock. Waste from livestock fertilizes gardens. Garden waste can be composted or fed to suitable animals. Generation and storage of energy. Develop renewable energy systems that reduce your dependence on stored fuel. Solar panels, wind turbines, water wheels, and systems powered by human strength can provide energy for critical processes. Develop the ability to create tools, equipment, and supplies that you and others need. Blacksmithing, carpentry, textile production, and electronics repair are becoming very valuable skills. Networks of information and intelligence develop systems for collecting and exchanging information with other survivor groups. Knowledge about resources, threats, opportunities, and technologies becomes extremely valuable for trade and cooperation. The days from 85 to 90 are an assessment of a new normal state, the final evaluation. The concluding phase of a critically important 90-day period is what I call the assessment of the new normal state. By the 85th day, you must honestly assess your long-term sustainability and make difficult decisions about the future. Conduct a comprehensive sustainability audit. Analyze resource exchange. Accurately calculate how much of each critically important resource you produce compared to how much you consume. Are you producing enough food, water, energy, and materials to maintain your current lifestyle? What is your trajectory? Improving, worsening, or stable? Assessment of skill gaps. What critical abilities are you still lacking? What will happen if key team members are injured or perish? Do you have backup specialists to perform essential functions? Security threat analysis. How has the security situation changed in the last 90 days? Are new threats emerging? Are existing threats becoming more or less dangerous? How effective are your current security measures? Assessment of community integration. How valuable are you to your community? Do you consider yourself an important member or a burden they tolerate? How will your absence or loss affect the group? The resilience of infrastructure. Are your physical systems, housing, water supply, food production, and energy sustainable in the long term? What services or improvements are needed? What will happen when the current equipment fails? Critical decision points on the 90th day. Decision about the location. Is your current location sustainable in the long term, or do you need to move? If moving is necessary, where will you go and how will you safely reach the new place? A decision about community. Is your current community viable in the long term, or do you need to find or create another group? What is needed to improve your current community compared to the beginning of life in another place? A decision on production strategy. What should you focus on in the next 90 days? Which production systems require the most attention? Which skills need development? Decision on risk management. What are your main vulnerabilities, and how do you plan to address them? What contingency plans need to be developed? The psychology of long-term survival. By the 75th day, you face psychological problems that most survival guides ignore. There is a reason why isolation torture is so effective. People are not meant to endure prolonged high stress and social isolation. Understanding post-traumatic growth. Survivors who thrived developed what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. They found meaning and purpose in their new circumstances rather than just enduring them. They became teachers, healers, organizers, or builders in their communities. This is not just psychology for boosting mood. It is a survival strategy. People who found purpose beyond their own survival became indispensable to their communities, providing protection and resource exchange that individual preparation could never offer. Develop psychological resilience, systems of meaning and purpose. Find ways to contribute to something greater than your immediate survival. Teaching others, caring for children or elderly community members, and participating in projects to improve life in the community brings psychological benefits that enhance survival chances. Maintaining social connections is important, and it is essential to develop and strengthen relationships even in difficult situations. Social isolation is a significant risk factor for mental health, which can negatively impact your decision-making ability and survival effectiveness. Managing mental health. Develop methods for managing stress, depression, and anxiety without modern medical interventions. This includes exploring meditation, physical activity, creative expression, and other non-pharmacological approaches to mental health, hope, and future planning. Maintain realistic optimism about the future while accepting current reality. People who can plan and work towards long-term goals have better psychological outcomes than those focused only on immediate survival. Acknowledgement of historical patterns. I am struck by how consistent these patterns are across different cultures and historical periods. I have studied everything from the blockade of Leningrad to the economic collapse in Argentina and Hurricane Katrina, and the 90-day pattern offers surprisingly consistent lessons from historical catastrophes. The Siege of Leningrad from 1941 to 1944 lasted for 872 days and provides incredible insights into long-term survival in extreme conditions. Survival was not necessarily for those who initially had the most food, but for those who developed sustainable resource extraction systems and maintained social networks. Key lessons include the importance of hygiene and sanitation, the value of small-scale production, and the critical role of information and communication networks. The economic collapse in Argentina from 2001 to 2002. This collapse provides insight into survival in modern urban conditions, where economic and social systems are crumbling, but the infrastructure remains largely intact. Survivors emphasize the importance of maintaining a normal appearance, developing alternative economic systems, the value of practical skills over academic degrees, and the critical importance of reliable social networks. Hurricane Katrina, 2005. This disaster shows how quickly social order can collapse even in developed countries with an extensive emergency response system. Key takeaways include the importance of having multiple evacuation routes and destinations, the value of self-sufficient resource systems, and the critical need not to rely entirely on government assistance. Common survival factors in historical events. Diversity of resources. Successful survivors never relied on a single resource or system. They had multiple water sources, different food systems, shelter options, and social networks. Accumulation of skills. Survivors who achieved long-term success were people who had accumulated practical skills before the crisis. These skills became their most valuable assets when normal economic systems collapsed. Maintaining social connections. Isolated people, even well-prepared ones, had significantly lower chances of survival than those who maintained strong social ties and relationships in the community. Psychological adaptability. People who could adapt their mental models and expectations to new conditions survived better than those who clung to unrealistic hopes of returning to former conditions. The paradigm of knowledge and resources. This leads me to what I consider the most important conclusion for those who take preparation seriously. After the 90th day, knowledge becomes infinitely more valuable than supplies. A family with a year's worth of food but no knowledge of production becomes a target and ultimately starves. A family with basic supplies but extensive knowledge of food preservation, water purification, and community building becomes the foundation of long-term survival. Prioritizing the acquisition of knowledge, exploring historical techniques, learning how people lived and survived before the advent of modern technology. Traditional skills often work better in resource-limited conditions than modern techniques reliant on complex supply chains. Master several skills. Do not specialize in just one area. Learn basic skills in multiple survival-related fields. This will make you more valuable to communities and provide backup options if your primary skill becomes less in demand. Learning and teaching systems develop the ability to quickly acquire new skills and teach others. Communities value people who can help others become more capable. Skills in innovation and adaptation. Learn to modify and adapt techniques based on available materials and changing circumstances. The ability to find solutions to new problems is incredibly valuable. Advanced preparation strategies based on the analysis of 90 days. Understanding the 90-day survival pattern changes the approach to preparation. Instead of merely stockpiling supplies, focus on developing systems and capabilities that address the specific challenges of each phase. Preparatory strategies by phases. Days 1 to 14. Focus of preparation. Develop excellent skills in gathering and assessing information. Practice safety. Maintain multiple communication systems. Build strong local networks before they are needed. Days from the 15th to the 45th. Focus of preparation. Identify potential partners in the community and develop mutual assistance agreements. Practice safety measures that ensure protection without provoking conflicts. Develop several storage locations for resources and ways to access them. Days from the 45th to 75th. Focus of training. Master production skills that can quickly start generating resources. Develop several backup systems for critical functions. Practice the transition from consumer to productive thinking and actions. Days from 75 to 90 and beyond. Focus on preparation. Create systems that multiply resources rather than just consume them. Develop your teaching and leadership skills. Create sustainable long-term production and community systems. The cascading effect of skills and multiplication of resources. It's amazing how traditional survival skills cascade and multiply. The mastery of meat preservation leads to an understanding of the sources of salt, opening up trade opportunities, forming social connections, and leading to mutual agreements for protection. Modern supplies are linear. There is a certain amount, and when it runs out, it is gone. Traditional skills have an exponential nature. Each mastered skill opens new opportunities for resource generation and community integration. Priorities in the development of practical skills. Mastery of water systems. Start by studying local water sources. Not only the obvious ones, such as rivers and lakes, but also indicators of groundwater, seasonal bodies of water, and water collection opportunities. Explore several purification methods: boiling, solar disinfection, sand filtration, charcoal activation, and chemical treatment. Practice creating water storage systems that prevent contamination and minimize losses. Learn to build rainwater collection systems and distribution networks using available materials. Food production and storage systems. Start with fast-growing, nutrient-rich crops that can yield quickly. Microgreens in 7 to 14 days, radishes in 30 days, lettuce in 45 days, beans in 60 to 90 days. Master the methods of companion planting that maximize yield and minimize pest problems. Master conservation techniques that do not require refrigeration: salting, smoking, drying, fermenting, and preserving in fats. Practice preparing fermented vegetables, dried meat, and dried fruits using simple equipment. Systems of medicine and health. Learn to recognize and prepare medicinal plants in your area. Many common weeds, such as dandelion, plantain, and yarrow, have significant healing properties. Practice making tinctures, teas, and local remedies based on available plants. Develop skills in traumatology that go beyond basic first aid. Control bleeding, treat shock, clean and stitch wounds, and manage pain without using pharmaceuticals. Abilities in production and repair. Learn to work with simple materials like wood, metal, and textiles using available tools. Practice making essential items such as soap, candles, ropes, and simple tools from accessible materials. Develop skills in repairing common equipment, engines, electronics, plumbing, and construction structures. Focus on techniques using accessible materials rather than requiring specialized parts. Days 85 to 90. Advanced integration and future planning. The final phase of the critical 90-day period should focus on consolidating your systems and planning for long-term sustainability. Advanced community integration strategies become indispensable. By the age of 85, you must establish yourself as a person whose loss would be detrimental to the community. This means being valuable in various aspects: practical skills, resource creation, problem solving, and social leadership. Identify the key, unmet needs of the community and become the solution to these problems. Is the community facing medical issues, water purification, food preservation, equipment repair, or safety planning? Become the person whom others turn to for answers. Develop leadership qualities. Even if you are not an official leader, cultivate leadership skills in your areas of expertise. Provide examples, teach others, solve problems, and facilitate more effective group decision-making. Practice conflict resolution and negotiation skills. Communities constantly face internal tensions regarding resource allocation, task distribution, and strategic decisions. People who can constructively resolve these conflicts become incredibly valuable. Knowledge transfer systems. Develop systematic ways to share your knowledge with others. Create curricula, write instructions, and establish apprenticeship systems. Your knowledge becomes more valuable when others can apply it. Document important information so that it outlives you. If something happens to you, will others be able to continue the work of the systems you created? Creating documentation and training systems ensures the preservation of your contributions, even in the event of your loss. Assessing long-term sustainability and optimizing resource flows. By the 90th day, you must have detailed information on resource production and consumption. Use this data to optimize your systems to increase efficiency and production. Identify bottlenecks and limiting factors in your resource systems. Does the availability of water limit your food production? Does the lack of tools restrict your production capabilities? Does the lack of skills affect the efficiency of your community? Risk management and contingency planning. Develop detailed plans for various scenarios: loss of key employees, resource system failures, security threats, environmental issues, and community conflicts. Create backup systems for critical functions. If your main water source fails, what is your backup option? If your primary food production area is threatened, where else can you grow food? If key community members are lost, who can take on their responsibilities? Planning for expansion and development. Plan for growth and improvement beyond the initial survival period. How can you increase resource production? How to attract valuable new members to the community? How can you expand your territory or influence in beneficial ways? Consider establishing trade relations with other communities. What do you have that others need? What do you need that others can provide? Creating trade networks between communities enhances the security and resources of all participants. Understanding how our ancestors lived provides amazing insights into survival after a collapse. Before modern infrastructure, people sustained themselves using methods that may still be relevant in crisis situations. Traditional community structures and historical societies were organized based on mutual aid and resource exchange, principles that modern educated people need to understand. In traditional villages, there were specialists, blacksmiths, healers, teachers, leaders, but each had basic skills in various fields. Explore the traditional management systems that operated without modern means of communication and control mechanisms. How did historical communities make collective decisions? How did they resolve conflicts? How did they organize work and distribute resources? Guild and apprenticeship systems. Traditional communities preserved and transmitted knowledge through formal educational systems. Masters trained students who ultimately became masters themselves. This system ensured the preservation of critically important information, even if someone died or left the community. Coordination of seasonal work. Historical communities organized seasonal events like sowing, harvesting, construction, and preparation. Everyone understood when to perform certain tasks and how their individual work contributed to the survival of the community. Systems of protection and safety. Traditional communities organized defense around civilian populations rather than professional armies. Everyone played their role in the community's defense, from early warning systems to actual combat capabilities. Traditional resource management. Management of common resources. Historical communities managed shared resources like water bodies, pastures, and forests through systems of collective management and individual responsibility, preventing overuse and ensuring access to essential goods. Waste disposal and recycling systems. Traditional communities wasted almost nothing. Organic waste fed animals or was turned into compost. Worn-out clothes became rags or stuffing. Broken tools were repaired, and their materials were used for other needs, conserving energy and resources. Without fossil fuels, traditional communities utilized everything they made as efficiently as possible. Building projects minimized heating needs. Cooking methods saved fuel. Transportation systems efficiently moved goods and people using available energy sources. Advanced preparation beyond 90 days. Understanding the 90-day survival pattern should be the foundation of your long-term preparation strategy. But survival does not end on the 90th day. That is when the real work begins. Creating sustainable systems, producing renewable resources, developing systems that generate more resources than they consume, permaculture gardens that improve over time, raising livestock to increase protein production, production systems creating valuable goods for trade, preservation and transmission of knowledge, create physical libraries with important information, printing necessary reference materials, create detailed instructions and develop training systems that preserve knowledge even in case of digital system failures. Master community development skills. Learn to effectively organize groups of leaders, practice conflict resolution, resource management, and strategic planning. These skills become incredibly valuable in post-apocalyptic scenarios. Develop inter-community relationships. Establish connections with people from other regions who can become your trading partners or allies. Create communication systems that will work without modern infrastructure. A fair view of reality. Let me be completely frank with you about what this information really means for your preparatory efforts. Most people watching this video will never encounter a real disaster scenario lasting 90 days. The overwhelming majority of disasters are temporary disruptions resolved by governmental and commercial systems within days or weeks. But understanding these patterns prepares you for the full spectrum of possible disasters, from temporary power outages to complete social collapse. Skills and thinking that will help you survive a 90-day collapse also make you more resilient in short-term emergencies. Moreover, developing these abilities fosters confidence and self-respect, which improve your life even in ordinary times. The ability to grow your own food, conserve resources, build things with your own hands, and interact effectively with others makes you more self-sufficient and capable regardless of external circumstances. The paradox of preparedness. The better prepared you are for the worst scenarios, the less likely you are to have to use that level of preparedness. Well-prepared communities are more resilient and recover faster from disasters. Well-prepared people make more measured decisions, which helps avoid dangerous situations. However, lack of preparation for serious disasters means that even small failures can become life-threatening. A 3-day power outage becomes dangerous without alternative sources of heat, water, and food. Temporary supply chain disruptions turn into a disaster if you lack basic resource supplies. Practical steps forward. If you are serious about implementing this information, start by developing skills for the first 14 days. Learn to quickly and accurately assess situations. Practice ensuring safety while gathering information. Build local networks before you need them. Then move on to skills from the 15th to the 45th day. Building community, resource exchange, and security coordination. These skills will help in both minor emergencies and major disasters. Finally, develop abilities on the 45th day and beyond. Resource production, advanced manufacturing, and community leadership. These skills will transform you from a person who merely survives disasters into one who helps others thrive despite them. Remember the resource I mentioned earlier in the video, the Lost Frontier Handbook. After studying all these historical survival models and traditional techniques, I understand why it has become a valuable resource for people serious about long-term preparedness. This guide is not just another survival manual full of theoretical advice. It is a comprehensive collection of historical methods that people have used to provide for themselves and their communities for generations, before the advent of modern infrastructure. Particular value lies in how he describes the transition from consumption to production, which I mentioned in the video. This is a critical issue that arises around the 45th to 60th day, when most well-prepared individuals fail. The guide presents techniques that show how to create renewable resource systems using knowledge and methods proven over centuries. The section on medical supplies covers methods for creating powerful remedies from plants and materials that you can find or grow yourself. Food preservation methods will help you stockpile large quantities of nutritious food without refrigerators or chemical preservatives. Water systems demonstrate how to create reliable sources of clean water outside of networks. These are not theoretical concepts. They are practical techniques that supported entire civilizations in conditions far worse than most disasters we may face today. The reality is that we live in increasingly uncertain times. The supply chains we depend on are more fragile than ever. The social and economic systems we take for granted are under unprecedented strain. You cannot control what disasters may occur, but you can control how prepared you are for them. The first 90 days after a major disaster will determine whether you become a survivor or a statistic. The models I presented to you today are based on historical analysis, interviews with survivors, and documentary cases of real disasters. These are not theoretical musings. They are practical frameworks that can guide your preparedness efforts and improve your chances of survival. But understanding these models is just the beginning. Knowledge without action is useless. You need to practice these skills, build these systems, and develop these relationships before they are needed. Start today with the basics. Honestly assess your current situation. Develop your capabilities in the first days and start creating local networks that can save your life during a real disaster. Remember, the goal is not just to survive the first 90 days after a serious disaster. The goal is to become the person who helps their community not only survive, but thrive. Regardless of the problems we face, the most successful survivors are not those with the most supplies or the best equipment. These are people with the right knowledge, the right skills, and the right relationships. What kind of person are you going to become? If this video was helpful for your preparation, don't forget to rate it. Share it with those who need to understand the important aspects of survival. What aspect of the 90-day survival plan seems the most challenging to you? What skills do you need to develop? What preparations should you start today? Take care.